Good evening. I'm Bruce Goldstein, Film Forum's Director of Repertory Programming. Tonight, we're going to meet the Oscar winning editor and sound designer, Walter Murch. But first, I want to introduce our host, great writer and critic, and a great friend, Michael Srago. Mike is a contributing editor for Film Comment and the author of Victor Fleming, an American Movie Master. He was the first regular movie critic for Rolling Stone and one of the first programmers for the Criterion Channel. His work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and The New York Times, and he wrote and co-produced the 2019 documentary Image Makers, The Adventures of America's Pioneer Cinematographers. His latest documentary project, Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen, which he wrote and co-produced, will soon be in theaters. And now here he is, from his home somewhere in California, is Michael Srago. Mike?
It's my pleasure, Bruce, to introduce Walter Murch. I should say the legendary Walter Murch, although that's the kind of word I know Walter is flinching at as I say it.
Terrible.
I could go through his list of credits, but that would take way too long. So let me give us a suitably wry twist to this by quoting one of Walter's collaborators, Philip Kaufman, with whom he worked on The Unbearable Lightness of Being and also some important work on The Right Stuff. And Phil said, the first time I saw Murch, he was asleep on his chem editing machine, having worked all night on The Conversation. He's the only editor I know who actually sleeps with his films. So on that note, let's talk about The Conversation. I know you and Francis's intention from the beginning was not just to make a great thriller. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what from the start conceptually was your take on distinguishing this from conventional movies of its type.
I think it's Francis. It's not me. I was the editor, not the writer-director. So you really have to talk about what Francis's intentions were. But he was intrigued by the process of secret recordings. He had done this himself when he was a teenager. Some of what Bernie Moran talks about in the film is actually stuff that Francis himself did. And he was also, as a screenwriter, interested in focusing on somebody who in other films has a maybe a 2-minute appearance in a film. And he wanted to go deeper into one of those anonymous people. And those two ideas of secret recordings and anonymous people wound up with the chemistry of creating Harry Call. So there was a...
Yeah, this was sort of the combination of Hitchcock and Hermann Hesse, I think you've talked about and Francis have talked about, a sort of balancing the character elements with thriller elements was sort of in the DNA of this film, very early on. And I was wondering how that affected the way Francis shot the film, but also the way you had to edit the film.
Yeah, this is, as Francis said, it was a combination of Hitchcock and Hesse, which are two metals that don't alloy very nicely together. And we were very aware of this during the shooting and even more aware of it during the editing, because in the end it came down to finding the balance of just enough of the murder mystery, the Hitchcock element, to keep that part of your mind ticking over, and enough of the character study to make Francis's original intention visible on screen. Harry, because Harry Haller is the hero of Hermann Hesse's novel Steppenwolf.
Yeah, and if you went too far in off in the balance of either of those things, it would throw the audience off, I would assume.
Yeah, if we emphasize the murder mystery, audiences, as we learned from many screenings with small audiences, people became impatient with the character study part. And if we tipped it the other way and we did character study and very little murder mystery, people wondered, what is this weird appendix of this? Get rid of that and just, Anyway, that we just kept working and working and working until we wound up with the balance that we have.
Yeah. I was wondering also whether the influence of a film like Blow Up, whether the idea was to do something with sound in the way that Antonioni did with Image in his movie, which was just a few years before.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of implicit in the idea to make a movie about a sound recording expert. Uh, and the other thing that characterizes the film is that it's told from a single point of view. Harry Call, Gene Hackman, is either in every shot or you are looking at something that he is looking at. In other words, there's no moment where two other characters go off and say, "What is it about Harry Call? Why did you know?" There is no escape from this. You're in Harry's experience, and characteristically, you only know as much about the murder mystery as Harry knows, which is very minimal because he doesn't want to know. What's revealed is this trauma of something, another job that really went bad for him and caused him to leave New York and move to San Francisco. Um, and interestingly, I asked Francis once, well, what about Martin Stett, the Harrison Ford character? What's his relationship? And he said, Francis said, I don't know. I don't know because I don't want to know. I only want to know, I as screenwriter only want to know what Harry Call knows. And because he felt that if he knew too much, the man who knew too much, the gravitational force of a murder mystery would overwhelm the character study part. And so he deliberately kept soft pedaling our knowledge of, for instance, Anne, the woman, Cindy Williams. Who is she? Is she his young wife, Robert Duvall's young wife, or is she his daughter, or what? We just don't know.
Yeah, yeah. There were, in terms of the sound of it, you're doing this with a kind of blow up with sound. I mean, was that your initial connection to the production? Because you had been Francis's sound wizard really since the Rain People, really his first American Zoetrope picture, and then this became also your first job as a picture editor. So was it always that you would do the two things, or did you come in first through sound, and then did Francis realize, well, we should let Walter take charge of this whole piece of post production here?
Yeah, it was pretty diffuse. It was kind of assumed, although never spoken, that I would do the sound on the film because of the nature of the film. And then one day Francis just said, well, why don't you edit the picture? And I had edited some commercials and a couple of documentaries, and I'd been around motion pictures, the Rain People, THX, American Graffiti, The Godfather. So I knew that part of it, but I'd never edited a feature before. It's like asking a gymnast do you want to run the marathon? Sure. But I had to figure out how to realign some of my mental muscles to take on the editing of a 2-hour film, which at the beginning, I think the first assembly of the film was 5 hours long. So there was a real push to get from 5 hours down to under 2 hours.
Yeah. What was in that? What was some of the stuff in that 5 hours? I mean, were there kind of subplots that got lost, or were sequences far more intricate and fleshed out than they appear? I mean, wow. How did you bring that down to this very tight movie that we have now?
Yeah, the significant scenes that evaporated were the character scenes. There was a whole subplot in the screenplay about Harry Call as the owner of the apartment building in which he lived, secret owner, and he gets deputized by the other inhabitants of the apartment building to go and find out who the owner is and complain about the bad service. And that leads to a whole subplot of the fact that this apartment building was going to be redeveloped and torn down anyway. So he didn't want to put in any extra, care to the infrastructure of the building. But there's almost, well, there in fact is nothing of that left in the film. That's the
Yeah.
main thing that went.
Yeah. On the other hand, uh, I understand that you were left with these huge holes because Francis had to shut down production for 2 or 3 weeks and simply ran out of time and money to do some of the scenes
Right.
and shots that he'd intended. Could you tell us a little bit about that? What that entailed for you?
I mean, the unusual thing about the film is that it was squeezed into a very narrow keyhole between Godfather 1 and Godfather 2. In fact, making the conversation was one of Francis's requests, demands. Uh, when he agreed to do Godfather 2, he said, okay, I'll do it, but A, B, C, D, D being, I want to make the conversation, which Warner Brothers had earlier turned down. And Paramount, very anxious to make Godfather 2, said, okay, you can do it. But that meant that Francis was on a very tight leash in terms of schedule. And for various reasons, the conversation ran slightly over in shooting schedule. And Francis just called it a wrap. And there was about a fifth of the scenes, in terms of the numbers of scenes, were not shot at that point. Many of them were connecting scenes that probably would have been cut anyway, but there was a significant scene where Harry goes back to his warehouse at the end of the film and finds people uh, doing things in there, mysterious people related to Bernie Moran. And that's where the two stories come together. Bernie Moran working for Robert Duvall, the Mr. C character. And that's where he understood that the people he thought were victims were actually part of the plot to murder the man he thought was the murderer. So anyway, that was the main challenge of what was not shot, of how to solve that problem. And in the end, we solved it. I think it came down to shooting one extra shot, with the plot twist that the Meredith, the woman who worked for Bernie Moran, sleeps with Harry Cole, and while he's asleep, she steals something. In the screenplay, she stole some plans for the microphone, the special microphone. And what we did in the compression of the film was to have her actually steal the tapes, which Harry had kept, which he didn't hand over to the Harrison Ford character toward the beginning of the film, when he suspects something fishy is going on here. So that tied the two stories together right about the, I don't know, maybe the 2/3 point in the film.
Yeah, and shooting that scene, I gather, going back to shoot that one pickup shot, which I guess is all you had to shoot, really, to make sense to
Yeah.
compensate for the 78 plus scene.
The reaction shot of Gene Hackman saying "bitch" is production, because this woman stole my plans. But what she stole, that was replaced. And so we shot an over-the-shoulder shot on Gene Hackman's back. It's actually Gene Hackman's brother. And in a little miniature set that we built on the stage of another film that Paramount was shooting at the time. And so we borrowed their camera, their B camera, and we borrowed their film and shot this one shot in probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 takes. It was a very simple shot where the keeper of the tape roll comes off, it's empty, and the boxes are empty. And then we cut back to Hackman saying "bitch."
And that
But
film was?
but if we had kept the camera rolling and panned 180 degrees to the left, it would have revealed Roman Polanski and Jack Nicholson waiting to get their camera back, because the film was Chinatown. So we could have merged the conversation and Chinatown, 2 C films, in one shot. But we didn't, a lost opportunity.
The one of the other things that Francis loved to do in that time was use documentary techniques in a way, infuse them with narrative storytelling techniques. Could you describe how some of that worked in the conversation? What scenes we see that are actually live, actors interacting with just live action on the street?
Yeah, that's a characteristic of the way Francis was shooting in the 1970s. The wedding in Godfather is a real wedding with guests who, aside from a few cameras, thought, well, I mean, they all knew what was going on, but it was a happy event that was covered in documentary style. And similar to the opening of the conversation, which is two actors in a real environment with four hidden cameras, hidden in the shrubbery, literally, photographing them among the innocent passersby in Union Square in San Francisco just before Thanksgiving in 1972, 50 years ago. So, and even the helicopter attack in Apocalypse Now is shot in a similar way. It's not like Saving Private Ryan, where every shot is storyboarded. They had 6 cameras, and everyone knew what had to happen, and a lot of chaos. And the hope was that we would get these moments of serendipity where amazing things happen that could advance the story that nobody could have predicted and set up to begin with. And that's very much like all of the acting in the conversation. It's just taken as a documentary event.
Yeah, yeah. So the conversation seems like a movie very much of its time, yet when I saw it again recently, it just also seemed like a movie made for this moment. I was wondering if you, having lived through it all these years, if you could describe where it's come in terms of its impact, from then till now.
I don't know. I mean, I do, when I do watch the film, it doesn't feel overly trapped in its moment of the early 70s. Even the costumes and the performances somehow are freed of that, even though the technology that you're looking at is primitive by today's standards. The one thing that I remark upon is the fact that Cindy Williams and stops next to a homeless person and says, "Oh, look, a poor homeless person. He was once somebody's baby boy." And that was in the early 70s when homelessness was not the thing that it is today. That's the one real thing that jumps out at me. I think obviously because of the internet and because of cell phones everywhere, there is a vastly expanded way to do what Harry Cole would have done back then, with great technical expertise, but difficult. Now it's difficult in a different way, but pervasive.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Walter. I mean, congratulations, first of all, on making a movie that seems so prescient today, just in terms of what you were just talking about. And also, thank you for sharing all your memories and insights about this terrific movie.
Sure.
Thank you.